Hello, everyone. Welcome to the African People Podcast. This podcast is about Africa, regarding the political side, the historical side, the cultural side, and so many more. Each week, I deliver my best thought and analysis regarding Africa. Here, your host, Amadouba. Today, I have a special guest with me here. Join me to welcome Mima. He's the chairman of Africa Global Sapphire. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me this week on African People Podcast.
My pleasure, Amadou.
Thank you. Sir, what is your experiences in Africa, sir?
I personally have been in Africa my whole life. I grew up in Ethiopia my first 10 years, so Africa is my home from that standpoint. The company Africa Global Schaefer has been operating in Africa now for just a little over 50 years. We, at this point, probably have been doing business in most of the 54 countries, with the exception of a few.
Perfect. So, what is a mini grid, please?
Certainly. So let me tell you, the Africa Global Schaefer Group is based here in Washington, D.C. We have an office in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So we have been operating throughout the continent, as I said, 50 years, with very strong, particularly in West Africa, in the Ethiopia region. Our big focal area is very much agro-business, agro-processing, agro-industry, value addition agriculture, and renewable energy. So let's speak about the renewable energy first. The mini grids and off-grid, it's called distributive power, is all about being able to bring electricity and power to the rural areas where we will not have grid for a long time. It's the only possible way that we can then basically be able to support value addition industry such as agro-processing. So
Okay.
that mini grid basically is a standalone grid off the main grid.
Okay. Sir, please, can you explain to us how technology can be the answer to mini grid in Africa, especially at this moment? Technology have been growing better more and more.
So there's two aspects to it. One, the technology of solar panels has been improving dramatically over the last few years, including bringing down the price in a very, very dramatic way. Especially the particular big technological changes in the last few years have been in storage technology, in the batteries. Because, the sun we have, even if it's a long day, is 10 to 12 hours. How do you then have electricity the other 12 hours? The answer is storage, batteries. And the cost of battery technology has drastically decreased so that now you can deliver 24/7 power in rural areas with solar, battery backup at a cost that is competitive with trying to truck diesel all the way out to the bush.
Okay, really interesting, sir. So let's talk about solar power, sir, because I know that Africa really need power, especially at this moment again. And so, do you think solar power is the cheapest, is the cheap energy to source, is the cheap energy source for Africa, and how?
So picking up on what I just said, given the technological advances and the cost decreases to solar power production and storage, it is now, particularly when you are far from the urban centers, very, very competitive. And the real beauty of this, the whole sort of strength, is that if we wait for grid, meaning the electric lines to come from the central, from the big cities, let's take Guinea. I'm going there Saturday.
Yeah.
Guinea, if you look at major power stations, are either in Kamsar or in Conakry. If you have to take a grid from there all the way up to your area, to Labe or up to Kankan, it's going to, first of all, be years before you have it. Secondly, it becomes very expensive. So what is the option that's been utilized now? Diesel trucks are running up to run the gensets way up to Kankan. So if they're traveling 800 kilometers to get there, cost today of capturing solar, let's take Kankan particularly because it's the furthest region from Conakry. With the solar power, with batteries combined, and setting up a mini grid around Kankan for 10, 15, 20 megawatts, whatever you need for the area, is absolutely going to beat the price of trying to do grid delivering and transmitting power from Conakry.
Mhm.
That is the strength and beauty, and that's one thing we have and have plenty of in Africa is sun. So
Yes.
once the expense of the equipment, which is a front end cost, is put in, after that, you've got guarantees. Even the batteries now have 20 years.
Mhm.
The sun basically doesn't cost you anymore. At that point in time, the fuel is free,
Mhm.
and so over time you become much more cost competitive than diesel.
Mhm. Perfect. So let's talk about the businesses, sir. So yes. So do you think solar power will help business grow up?
In a big way, and especially again in rural areas. What do you make business? I mean, business is either commerce, which is very good. It's a
Mhm.
livelihood. You're trading. But to trade things, you have to process. You have to manufacture something. I always tell
Mhm.
my African colleagues, we can't trade bananas for bananas. Somebody's got to make putu or pounded bananas to trade against my banana chips.
Mhm.
Well, to do banana chips or to do pounded banana or yam or doesn't matter what the crop is, you need electricity. You need power. And that is what the difference is. What the electricity
Mhm.
does will allow in the rural areas by these off-grid and solar capabilities and storage to allow industry to grow up as far out in the bush as you can imagine. Where today I would imagine the yams or the cassava, these rice is probably being manually
Mhm.
pounded to dehusk it versus getting solar power, running a small 2 ton per hour mill, and then being able to actually then usefully occupy, particularly the women, into other areas of being productive. And now you can storage,
Mhm.
cold storage. What happens to most of the food production in on the continent? Something I've read the data, but something like 40 to 60% literally gets spoiled,
Mhm.
whether it's fish or it's produce.
Okay.
Well, before you even begin increasing, why not create the post-harvest storage facilities? And oftentimes that requires a cold chain and that requires power. So right back to that, that all allows business to happen. If you're going to sew these little masks we're all wearing now, right?
Mhm.
That could be done manually, but if you want to mass produce it, sewing machines run much better with electricity. You
Mhm.
now have power, so you can have the small sewing clothing industry. No industry, we cannot modernize, we cannot grow economically without power. This is why I said industrialize Africa, one of the biggest one of the high fives of presentation of the African Development Bank is called industrialize Africa.
Mhm.
Industrializing without power, you can't do it.
Yes.
So that's how you help the business.
Okay. So let's talk about again the solar power, sir. So how can solar power assist in promoting the development of agri-processing?
Okay, so let's take, by definition, farms are in the bush. All right, let's go to Kankan. It's further
Mhm.
than Labe. We go all the way up to
Mhm.
Kankan. You're way off the grid. If you want to now run a rice mill, they're big in rice, or cashew processing, you have to have electricity.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you can, I mean, you can use manual labor, but there's a limit of how much of that can happen for industrialization. So we're proposing, in fact, even with the African Development Bank that wants to put an agro park in Kankan, is say, okay, let's look at how to power it up with locally available resources. What is that? That's called sun. So we bring the sun down, we capture it, we have batteries, we put a closed circuit, and we're able now to industrialize and create manufacturing, create jobs from small to large. I mean, the solar power now in the U.S. is going to in the gigawatts. I mean, we are turning big time solar, and we have less sun than Africa. So why shouldn't Africa have solar power to be able to spur industrialization and economic activity?
Good. So, well, why is agro-process and agro-business important in the post-COVID world to restart the economy and so to assume food security, sir?
So the big discussions on COVID, we all we're going to survive COVID. There will be
Mhm.
the day after COVID in whatever different forms it is. The fact is, we have to eat to survive, right? So it doesn't matter with COVID or no COVID, somebody's got to grow the food for us to survive. My argument, Africa Global Schaefer argument, is that getting food security is important. And at the same time, we tell the government authorities, think of agribusiness, agro-industry. It's not just food security, but it's also the ability to create excess, to industrialize and create wealth. It's basically creating wealth so that the smallholder can become a small farmer. Rather than just continue with peasant labor, he begins to have some small equipment, some farming. All of this is only possible through power and electricity. And this is why I'm saying in the post-COVID world, focus on using agribusiness, agro-industry, agro-processing, not only to assure food security, but to also kickstart economies. Because what has happened now? We have less in Guinea, but let's go to Nigeria and other countries. We have heavy urbanization. With 25 million people in Lagos, those people are not doing their gardening. They're not even able to go out to the village again. They go to the ShopRites. They go to the grocery store. That means in the grocery store, you can't have 50 kilo sacks of rice. They won't even fit in a Lagos apartment. So somebody's going to take the rice, package it, smaller amounts, brand it, advertise it. There's a whole value chains that are being developed with agro-industry. And this is why I said, to me, it's a Kickstarter, because now the African population, I got my facts right again, is roughly 50% urban and increasingly so. That means more than half of the people increasingly will need to depend on somebody else produces their food. So agriculture must become a business, and not just sustainable. It's sustainable agriculture, yes, but not just for sustaining living, for making a good living, so that I, as an agro business person, I make a good living. The extra money I make, I spend on something else that somebody else is either manufacturing or restaurants. It's all about getting economies going. And this, to me, is agribusiness, agro-process for Africa is literally the fire starter.
Talking about agriculture, we see that, for example, Ethiopia, agriculture has been the economy to help Ethiopia to develop. So what is your knowledge about that in general, about agriculture in Africa?
Well, I mean, we built a sugar factory in Ethiopia, so I'm very familiar with Ethiopia. We can go on to the various countries we've operated in. The key to agriculture is to really make it an inclusive growth sector. I think Ethiopia's been making certain problems they're trying to resolve now, where they went from peasant smallholder farming to big industrial estates. Well, I can tell you, neither works. Peasant farming is managing poverty. You're going to stay poor. If you do only industrial estates and you don't bring in around you the community, the small farmers, to make them, the good farmers, bigger farmers, you're going to have social revolution on your hand. So this is why I say you have to do both. You have to have the commercial agriculture, process, industry. This is where foreign investment is interested. We invest in rice mills, sugar mills, cassava mills. We're not in farming, but by putting up these kind of structures that add value to the crop, we also create the market to the farmers. We have a guaranteed market. We need to keep the equipment going 24/7. That then makes the farmers need to be more effective, more efficient. That requires mechanization. That then requires fewer people, which means some people are liberated to do other industrial jobs. Look at China. China, we went from an agricultural society to an urban one with manufacturing. Well, why not Africa?
Why not Africa? Really a good question. Yes. So how to unlock investment and growth of grid in Africa?
I think the first thing is really because electricity is always somehow regulated by the authorities, right? So I think the key thing is for government authorities to recognize and understand that the future is in solar. The developed world is turning to solar, then certainly the developing world should also. The next thing is understanding how to incentivize those sort of investments so that you get a proper return. People are investing, producing power. they need to make a return. So I think where the key is really having that regulatory environment where the regulating authorities, government, understand what it takes to bring in the investors to develop it. That, to me, is really the absolute key to the whole industrialization of the continent.
Okay, sir. So, do you think the grid is accelerating of great electricity access in African countries?
Well, what it's doing is think of the way power used to be.
Mhm.
Big central thermal power station, most cases. Then the long lines going out with lots of electricity along the way. What you're seeing now is going more to this distributive generation model, whereby instead of only one central place, you can now start to produce in various places. And maybe those mini grids then can interlink back to the core grid. But don't let the people that are further away from the center have to wait till their grandchildren to get power when they can have it today.
Mhm.
And this can be whether it's produced by by solar, by biomass. I mean, even the program with West Africa LNG you spoke about last week with Chairman Patricia Moeller. It's not a renewable fuel, but it's a clean fuel. So ability to deliver the LNG for cooking and an industry rather than chopping down trees to make fire is obviously environmentally much more sustainable and cleaner. So it's all comes down to the same thing. Try to get as much power at the place where the power is used. Then it's costing you less to get it there, and there's no loss.
Okay,
Transmission.
perfect. So, do you think scaling of grid electricity is a challenge for development?
It is, but I think we're meeting it. I think everyone's understanding it, that it really is going in that direction. Because remember with solar, when it first started coming out 15, 20 years ago, and it's still nice. You can have little small solar units to power up a refrigerator, a health center, TV. We even have some solar cabins we're developing in Nigeria, down in the Delta region. But in the end, the answer is simply being able to begin to develop through the mini grids sufficient power generation and storage, so it's 24/7, that allows industry to grow wherever it is. All of a sudden, Kankan becomes Des Moines, Iowa.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to depend on some power company. They have their own power. South Africa at this moment is going crazy with brownouts. In the provinces, the various states are saying, listen, we need to be starting producing our own power and generating, because obviously depending on central government, it's not working. So these are the kinds of issues regulatory need to be understood. The key is very simple, Amadou. Deliver power and generate as much of it as you can to there where the people and the industry is.
So let's talk about investment a little bit because I don't want to to live here without talking about investment as someone who has been doing investment, especially in Africa, over 25 years, and another have
50.
you have experiences about it. So what is your knowledge? What is your knowledge about that investment in Africa? And in your knowledge, what are the easiest place to do business in Africa?
You put me in a spot as the easiest places. Let me put it this way. The easiest places are the places that welcome the investment, right? What does business need to know? It needs to know the rules under which it's operating, all right? Whether it's contract, sanctity, there's all kinds of fancy terms. The simple fact is business has to be profitable. Business will move to wherever it is welcomed. It will move to where there are bigger markets. That's been part of the problem with all the chopped up small countries, or many small countries on the continent, where the whole continental free trade zone is assisting by creating even the regional blocks, larger communities of people, which is larger markets. It's no surprise that the biggest companies on the continent, aside from SA, have grown up in Nigeria. Why? Because it's the single largest market. Big companies can afford to become big, can achieve to be big in a big market. Guinea is 10 million. Togo is, I don't know, 7. What kind of a market is that? You have to have a bigger market to be able to really reach out from there. And then there where you're most welcome, where the regulatory part is, easier some business. And most importantly, time is money. We all know that. For businesses, especially the case. The biggest, should I say, obstacle to new businesses coming into Africa, particularly out of the U.S., is the amount of time it takes, and it's costly. So how do we make it easier for business to come in? How do we get them to understand who the partners are? There are associations like Invest Africa, Corporate Council in Africa, that help those sort of things. We've been operating 50 years, so I've got partners everywhere. The key is solid partners, good business, and then what you're seeing on the continent is the growth of, people can argue what is the definition of middle class. So I call it spending class. When you got $5, $10, $15 a day more in your pocket, you can spend it. That is money that somebody's going to earn doing something, that they get money that they then spend somewhere else. So when people speak about turning up the economy and the multiplier effect, it has to start somewhere. That's again why I say food processing is often so important, because that everybody has to eat, or housing. Everybody needs shelter or clothing. These basic things really should be able to be produced on the continent where we're using it. So that, to me, I think is really the most important. And then speaking in terms of the U.S. interest coming in, there's a big initiative now with, so maybe interviewed other people on Prosper Africa, which is all about basically bringing in U.S. investors onto the continent. We're saying, listen, China didn't discover secrets. They discovered reality that we didn't, that there's an awful lot of good business to be done on the continent. And we're saying as Americans, we do it differently. We recognize, thank you for letting us know that exists, for those who didn't know it. Now let's do it. And finally, for SMEs, and this is where the Prosper Africa, I think, is so important, the ability now because of communications. I mean, just if you look what our cost of telephones and whatnot used to be 20 years ago for today, it's less cost. You can afford to get into new markets. Smaller companies can, because they can reach out to the partners in a way they couldn't. And one last point, 20 years ago, Schaefer, as it was called that time before it became Africa Global Schaefer, was very early in the 90s, 80s, 90s, doing private business as a U.S. SME. Nobody at that time did business like we did with the mining companies, oil companies. And the main reason was they couldn't find the African partners. There wasn't the African private sector. That African private sector today, in the last 20 years, has boomed from the small to the medium to the largest Dangotes. But for every Dangote, there's tens of thousands of other growing businesses. They're the partners. And as I always say, business likes to do business with businesses. Now, American business has somebody they could do business with. And that really is what this whole Prosper Africa platform is about.
Okay, sir. Really interesting, sir. So, sir, in your knowledge, what are the solutions to electrify Africa?
I think exactly what is happening now. Use multiple resources. Coal is out, it's done. There's no point. So at this point, we have to transition. There's still the diesel. That's very dirty also. There's one transitional fuel that is at least clean, even if not renewable, and that's the LNG. That's why we're involved with that project that's West Africa LNG. And then going to the renewables, the solar, the winds, and hydros, and you name it. But the real key is actually what has happened, is the recognition that no electricity, no industry. No industry, no jobs. No jobs, guess what? Politicians got a problem. That's why that whole sort of that whole concentric circle, to me, has come together. You need power to industrialize, you need industry to create jobs. And if you don't create jobs, especially with a booming population in Africa, you doubling, you got some serious social problems. So you better hurry up and fix that electric problem. And that's, I think, what has now happened. Government authorities are recognizing it, and they're working hand in hand in all kinds of schemes with private investors.
Anything else would you like to add, sir?
I guess what I would add is really having spent my whole life, both personally and in business, on the continent. I'd like to, reach out to my brethren, if you will, in Africa. In America. I'm confused sometimes of African or American, but in the United States, both the diaspora community as well as the ones that never did business in Africa. Why do you want to come from Des Moines to do poultry farming in Accra, in Ghana? Because you have a middle income country coming up, a big population in Kumasi and in Accra. The first thing people do when they have extra cash is increase their diet. That means increasing protein. That usually means increasing poultry. Come and invest. I can tell you who the poultry farmers are in Ghana. And then what do chickens eat? They eat maize and soya. Who can produce maize and soya in the feed? Now you vertically integrate. That's how you build. You build on your own market. Yes, exports. I think exports are good. We need to have exports. But you know where the real growth is going to be? Exactly why everybody's interested in Africa now, because we're doubling in population. That is why everybody's coming back to Africa.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining me this week on African People Podcast, sir.
Amadou, my pleasure. Look forward again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining me this week on African People Podcast. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, so you'll never miss a show again. Thank you so much for joining me. See you.